Hey guys, here we are for Chapter 11, Section 2, Protecting and Sustaining Marine Biodiversity. So water, but obviously talking about our saltwater end of it. Now let's look at some ways. We're going to talk about some generic ways that we can sustain our marine biodiversity, and then we'll look at some of the problems with them. But first off, we're going to just use laws. Laws and economic incentives. Unfortunately, if it's not illegal, people perceive it as being legal, whether it's a good idea or not. So we have to establish laws to protect some of these species or ecosystems. Otherwise, they're just going to get abused because tragedy of the commons. It belongs to everyone, therefore it belongs to no one. It's in my vested interest to exploit it to the best of my ability. We have to have laws to do it, and economic incentives. You know, if it's in my economic best interest, then I might do it. We need to set aside marine reserves to protect these ecosystems. We've got to have a preserve. We've got to have something saying, hey, you can't come in here, you can't fish here, you can't mine here, whatever the case may be. There has to be some protected zones, home base, if you will, intact, somewhere that things can go and it's protected. Also, we can use community-based integrated coastal management. This is a long, fancy way of saying give communities an economic incentive to protect it, and they will. If this community has that area as a resource that they can draw money in, whether it's tourism dollars or fishing dollars, but it's exclusive to this community, they tend to manage it really well. Australia's Great Barrier Reef is a spectacular example of this community-based system at work. I mentioned laws. We need to establish laws. In reality, there's a lot of laws already on the book. Let's just kind of tick them off real quick. The first one, established in 1975, CITES, C-I-T-E-S, for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. So if it's a matter of trading in endangered species, well, this is already on the books. It's illegal, and we can arrest people over it. 1979, we established the Global Treaty on Migratory Species, like whales or things that are moving along. So we have laws on the book protecting these migrating species. The U.S. Mammal Protection Act, protecting mammals, once again, dolphins, whales, sea lions, things of this nature. In '76, we had the Whale Conservation and Protection Act. 84, the United Nations Law of the Sea Treaty. And in 1995, the International Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of all of these laws, but kind of if it's about endangered species, well, you can quote the CITES. If we're talking about if it's a migratory animal, well, let's talk about the Global Treaty on Migratory. If we're dealing with conservation or protection, or are we talking about biological diversity? So you'll get a heads up as to which law you may want to reference, but they tend to be pretty obvious in what they're trying to do. Now, some of the problems with these ideas, whether it's setting aside marine reserves, whether it's making laws or enforcing ones that are on the books or giving economic incentives, this is what we come down to. Our ecological footprint is expanding. So our ecological footprint and our fish print, if you will. We keep fishing more. We keep wanting more. Human populations growing. So we need more food, we need more resources, and the footprint keeps growing, getting bigger. This is an issue, it's a problem, something we have to address. Once again, most of the damage to the ocean is completely invisible to you and me. We don't see it. I look at the ocean, it's this vast resource, right? It's just infinite in the amount that it has in it. It seems that way, but it's not. The oceans are viewed very incorrectly as inexhaustible. It's not inexhaustible. We have the technology, the resources, and the know-how to go out there and take way too much for it to be renewable. We're degrading it at an alarming rate. But part of the problem is we don't see it. Out of sight, out of mind a lot of times. And most of the ocean lies outside of the legal jurisdiction of any country. We'll talk about the economic or the legal zone where it's inside of a country, and then there's the high seas. And when you're out on the high seas, there's very little legal jurisdiction, and enforcing it is incredibly difficult. It's just so big and open, if you will. So, let's talk about establishing marine sanctuaries. This is a big one. Offshore fishing. Now this is that aspect, there is 200 nautical miles. So when we're talking about offshore fishing, a lot of it happens fairly close to shore. So 200 nautical miles off of every country belongs to that country. So off the coast of the United States, within 200 nautical miles, you're legally in U.S. waters, and only U.S. flagships can fish in those waters. Otherwise, you have to have special arrangement, agreement, etc. Outside of 200 nautical miles, open sea. Anybody can go there and fish there from any country, and they can come right up to this line. But this 200 nautical mile often winds up getting overfished because countries will subsidize fishing fleets to go out there and catch fish in this area, because we can legally catch anything here. And even though it's designed to give a country ownership, the area still becomes so big, areas get overfished a lot of times, even though the idea is, since it belongs to us, we'll treat it well. And then once again, these high seas areas are just really difficult to enforce. You're out there, but it's a big, wide open area, and it's hard to track who's catching what. And once people bring catches back to their home country, a lot of times people aren't really looking and see, did you catch too many fish? A lot of times it's a no harm, no foul. You didn't do it in our waters, so we don't care. We need to create marine protected areas, or MPAs. Currently, marine protected areas, they only cover about 2.8% of the ocean's surface. Now this means they're protected in some shape, form, or fashion. They're partially protected. Maybe you can't fish there, but we're still doing mining. Maybe you can't fish there, but we're still drilling for oil. It depends. But in some way, at least 2.8 of them are protected from human involvement. Marine reserves. These are completely off limits to fishing, dredging, mining, and waste disposal. And this is really what we're after. We need to create marine reserves that are absolutely 100% protected. Part of the reason for that is the amazing potential of the ocean to recover if we just let it be. Within 2 to 4 years where we have these marine reserves, we have seen complete recovery of species in numbers and in size, whether it's tuna, cod, shrimp, oysters, you name it. If we will just let it be and cease the fishing, mining, dredging, whatever it may be, the ocean has an amazing resilience and a potential to simply rebound if it's left alone. Also, nearby fisheries really benefit from this, because the fish don't just stay there. The fish don't realize, ooh, here is a little protected area. They come in and they go out and leave. So nearby areas still benefit from these reserves. There's a huge benefit to it, but we have to establish them, we have to protect them, and we can't get into it. We have to look at it as natural capital that we're not going to go into. Currently, 1.2%, really about 1% of our current ocean is protected in this way. That number has got to go up. A lot of people think it should be in the 30% range. Once again, if we can rope off certain areas, it benefits everybody in the long run. These things will rebound in a short amount of time, but we've just got to get out there and establish them so that we get the benefits from it. Now another is the idea of restoring and preventing, and it really should be kind of preventing and restoring, and you'll see what I mean in just a second. Japan has had incredible success with reseeding their coral reefs. There are areas where the coral reefs have died, And they've gone in and they drill these holes down in the existing coral. The coral's dead, it's just whitened bleach. But they drill a hole down and they reseed it with some live coral. So now that little bit of live coral is protected and it has somewhere for it to grow and reseed. The coral reefs come back very quickly. And you see by this picture with the new coral growing out of the old. Of course, this only works if we can address the problem. Now, if the problem is because the ocean has gotten warmer there and the coral reef won't grow, or if it's too much acidification from whether it's nitrous oxide, whether it's carbonic acid or sulfuric acid, if it's acidity, those can be very difficult to address. But if it's waste and tourism, those are things we can address and eliminate to help restore them. So if we can prevent whatever was causing the problem, then we can do these restorative plans and they can come back. So if we can identify the problems that cause the degradation, then we can do some of these restoration programs and see them pop back up into life. Sometimes we just got to rope them off. We just got to present a reserve. Other times, like in coral reefs, we need to do something a little more proactive and get in and do some reseeding. Another one that we talk about is this integrated coastal management. A fancy way of saying provide ownership to a local community. If the community has a stake in it, they have an economic stake, so we're going to benefit from tourism that comes here, or we're going to be able to fish this area specifically, and no one else can, they tend to take more ownership, and we tend to get a much more sustainable ecological profile, if you will. But we've got to develop workable, cost-effective, and adaptable solutions. We look at what Japan has done, and we can adapt that to this area and use that same technology. It has to be doable, has to be cost-effective, and it's got to be somewhat adaptable. We need to look around at the world. We need to have scientists inform other people what we're doing and what's working so that we can do more restoration projects around the world and come up with ways that will work for everybody. This is a huge thing that we can do something about and we need to do something about. Enforce the laws that are already on the books, come up with ways to restore, and come up with ways to prevent what caused the problem in the first place, and we can have a very sustainable marine biodiversity in your and even my lifetime. Wraps it up for section 2. Come back and join me next time when we look at sustaining our marine fisheries. Take care. See you next time.